Okay, so how comfortable was that story? Radically uncomfortable, preacher. Thank you very much. It's uncomfortable. I mean, it's when you're talking about life and death, when you're talking about the afterlife, and when you're talking about money, it's the third rail of religion. You talk about it, you're going to die. Like if you don't deal with it the right way, you're out. The thing about third rails, it's where the power is. If you think about trains, the third rail, that's what powers the engine. So the afterlife, and that you don't even have to go too far to figure that out about talking about the afterlife in terms of religion. You go to Barnes & Noble into the religion section, I could get rid of half of the books out there because they're all really terrible books about the afterlife. I'm sure the authors are well-intentioned, trying their best, but I do not believe that there is a publisher out there who doesn't hear a life after death story and doesn't see dollar signs. Give me a neuroscientist who somehow proves that hell is real. Money. Some kid comes back from a coma. You can just feel publishers salivating. And that's nothing to say of truly passionate Christians. Truly passionate Christians. And I call them Christians not because they reflect anything I believe, but because people will paint me and them with the same brush. This week, I received in the mail, anonymously, 2 tracts that describe why and how I'm going to hell. Who knew you could send that information through the mail? I thought that was reserved for the corner of the street and a megaphone. And so there are sisters and brothers who will hear this story, and the most important aspect is, see, heaven and hell are real, and you should be scared of hell and want to go to heaven. And you have to say the sinner's prayer in order to get to heaven. Despite that heaven and hell aren't even mentioned in this story. And if you really get over why the guy goes to the place of torment, it's not the sinner's prayer. It's not faith in Jesus or lack thereof. It's how he handles money. Which gets us to the other side of this conversation. You get that opening painting and questions about poverty start rising up for you, the complexities thereof. And however you feel about poverty and like kind of systemic, chronic, ongoing poverty, the circumstances that have shaped your opinion, some of it is from your childhood. Till my dying day, I will remember when I was 7 years old and we were in San Francisco. And it was the first time I kind of was immersed in a large population of people asking for money on the streets. I was from a small town in the middle of nowhere, Minnesota, and there was a guy with a sign that said, "I need a beer." And my dad looked at it, he goes, "The guy's honest. Here's enough money for 2. And that was just like, I laughed, I thought it was funny, but like, now I've grown, I've gotten older, and maybe you've had experiences like I have. You helped someone who gave you the best story you've ever heard of this, like, if there's an opportunity to pull them out of poverty, like, just these few dollars will help, or somehow do it. And it doesn't. You got burned. Mental health issues, substance abuse, just kind of chronic issues surrounding poverty, like the systems that are meant to keep people down on top of all like the personal choices of it all. And that's nothing to say of even sometimes we've had theology baked in, whether explicitly or implicitly, that, people get what they deserve in this world. If you work hard enough. If you pull yourself up by your bootstraps. They're just trying to scam you. To say nothing of, so my dad gave me a kind of a sense of humor about it all. There's plenty of folks who were raised to look at people who are asking for money, not just with suspicion or humor or with generosity, but that they are outright lying to you. And then, to add even more complexity to the story, you're hearing this in church from Jesus. Now let's get even more complicated, because you're even listening to someone who has had who has been on the receiving end of toxic theology that says, if you want more money, give to the church. Pressed down, pouring over, will men pour into your bosom. They quote that. They'll open up the gates of heaven if you but open your wallets into the offering plate. And so you're hearing money sermons in churches, and the guards all start coming up. I want to acknowledge all of these things because, frankly, this story, if your guards go up too quickly, you're missing one of the core teachings of Jesus. Something that Jesus is calling each one of us to do, no matter where we find ourselves on the economic spectrum. And it's a hard story. I mean, you can't help but hear this story. Like, when I read this story, I can't help but feel like Charles Dickens read this story and was like, it's such a bummer. Let's put it at Christmas. That makes everything better. Right? So we get into it a little bit. First off, remember who Jesus is talking to. If I read you kind of the paraphrase, you get the setting in which who Jesus is talking to. Literally about 10 verses earlier, Jesus is talking, the Pharisees are mocking Jesus about how unrealistic his teachings are. The gospel writer ends up saying those listening to him are consumers of money. They love their money and they believe that their money makes them holy, that their money is a sign that God loves them. And that's when Jesus comes out with this story. There was a certain rich man who clothed himself in purple and fine linen, who feasted luxuriously every day. You're getting the sense that to wear purple, in order to make a clothing purple, was an extremely rich dye. In fact, even into the Victorian age, purple was only reserved for the Queen, because that's how expensive it was to produce that dye. So for first century Palestine, someone to be clothed in purple linen gives you that sense, let alone feasting luxuriously every day. Later on, it says that Lazarus desired the crumbs from the table. In your mind's eye, when you picture this, I'm guessing what you picture is something similar to me, that they're gorging themselves so much and so quickly that it's messy, right? That stuff just falls. This isn't that might be right. I heard, and I always hesitate sharing things that I only hear another preacher say. But I heard a pastor, a reputable one, say that at the time, cleaning fabric wasn't done as regularly as we do now. But producing bread would have been something a rich person could do quite regularly. And that the practice at the time was that instead of a cloth napkin, is that you had slices of bread to wipe your face. And that is what gets tossed. For me, it makes a little bit more sense than eating like a duck and just letting things fall to the side. But I gave you I only heard it from one pastor. At his gate, so that's another thing, at his gate. There may be people here who have gates at your homes. I had my parents didn't have a gate, they had 2 pillars, and it's always that sign of like, ooh. And if you actually have a gate where it's like, beep, I'm here to talk to the whoever's living here, you got like security like that, that's usually a sign of something. And think about this 2 centuries ago. What does it mean for a guy to have a gate? I have a hard enough time convincing people that like there's an up and down stairs in buildings at this time, but a gate. He has the gate, and Lazarus is laid there. Another thing, what's the rich man's name? Right. This is already kind of like, for the people who Jesus is first telling this story to, it's kind of insulting. Right? For all of his wealth enough to have a gate, wealth enough to be using bread as a napkin, wealth enough to have purple clothes. We don't remember his name. For those of us who have money, what are you spending it on? Who will remember you? And for what? Jesus, not even remembering his name, but remembers the poor man on the ground laying at the gate, longing for bread. This I did actually dive into a little bit more. The word for laying there, is thrown. A couple of implications. One, maybe it's societal. He is so kicked out of normal society. This is the only place he's allowed to be. At the gate of someone, out on the outskirts of pleasant company on the other side of a wall. Another interpretation, thrown as in his legs don't work, which gives some understanding of where the sores come from. He's laying on the ground. He hasn't been able to stand for how long, and the sores begin to form. Another plaguing theology of the time of Jesus is that your health was a reflection of how God viewed you. A couple of weeks ago, I shared a story about how I will say I am lucky that my children were born healthy, because I don't believe God who makes unhealthy babies. This is part of that. I want to inoculate you from this theology that says God is interwovenly, directly involved in inflicting punishments on you, and that's a result of your bank account and your health. That's where you see it. So Lazarus is thrown and has sores that are so infected that it attracts the animals. Dies of his wounds, and he is carried to paradise, otherwise known as Abraham's side. This is actually where I love engaging with friends who look at the Bible a little bit differently than I do. Because the word heaven, Jesus could have said heaven. Heaven was a thing. The afterlife was a thing. Instead, he uses the word paradise and Abraham's side. This is not heaven. This is actually a Greco-Roman understanding of the afterlife. The Greco-Roman of the afterlife, which Jesus later uses again, Hades, the land of the dead, which is separated between 2 places. There are 2 places in the land of the dead in Greco-Roman understanding of the afterlife. You are waiting for the final judgment in the afterlife. One, dang it, I have to look it up. One is paradise, where you are comforted for all of your good deeds. The other one, Tartarus, that's the word. Tartarus is where you are tortured for your evil deeds as you await the final judgment. The Greco-Roman understanding of the afterlife. Paradise is up, Hades is down. The 3-tiered universe of the Greco-Roman understanding of the world. Hades is up, Hades, the afterlife, is split between two: paradise up, Tartarus down. So there's a dichotomy here. One thing to understand before we go any further: you are, as Jesus is telling this story, you're picturing the rich man and you're picturing Lazarus. You're feeling a little bit of contempt for the rich man. You're feeling compassion for Lazarus. And maybe, just maybe, you start picturing yourself in one of those two positions. If you have parts of your life where you have been a Lazarus, you are being comforted by this story. That in the end, you are brought to paradise. And then when Jesus is at his best, he's comforting the afflicted and he's afflicting the comfortable. When Jesus is teaching at his best, he is comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. Because this is the last we really hear of Lazarus directly from Jesus. He ends up putting the rest of him through the mouth of a third character. While being tormented in the place of the dead, the rich man looked which way? Three-tiered universe. He looks up and sees Abraham at a distance with Lazarus at his side. And he shouts, "Father Abraham, have mercy. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water to cool my tongue because I'm suffering." And Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received good things, Lazarus terrible." So here he is, being tormented in the afterlife, and he has this vision above him. He recognizes Abraham, but he recognizes him as Abraham and sees Lazarus. Does he have any guilt, any shame, any regret, any understanding that he's there for a reason? Doesn't seem clear. How does he see Lazarus? Lazarus in the story is another servant. Abraham, he's not even addressing Lazarus. Father Abraham. He sees the relationship between he and Abraham, but he doesn't see any relationship between him and Lazarus. He still doesn't. He's in the afterlife being tortured, and he still sees Lazarus as an errand boy. Just send the guy. Send him to cool me off. No address to Lazarus like, "I should have let you in. Would you let me in? Would you at least cool me off, cool the tongue?" Then the rich man said, "I beg of you, Father, send Lazarus. Send Lazarus to my father's house." Really? They didn't even get it the first time, right? First it's, "Send Lazarus to me." I'm not sending Lazarus to you. He can't come to you. Well, then send Lazarus. I always wonder, I kind of wonder, what would he have said if Lazarus, would you? You know, one of the things I've known about those who have experienced homelessness is how many people don't even look them in the eye, who just don't want to acknowledge that they're there. Then the rich man said, "Then I beg you to send Lazarus to my father's house. I have 5 brothers. He needs to warn them so that they don't come to the place of agony." And Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets, and they must listen to them." Lazarus doesn't think that that's going to be enough, because the rich man doesn't think that that's going to be enough, because he had Moses and the prophets. There's one key part of this story I've kept from you. That kind of changes the subject. To leave it as is, and without this pivotal point, you might think that this story only, I can't even say it completely does it, but you might say that this story only says, if you have spare money, you're stealing from the poor. That this is a track of anti-being rich, of not having a savings account. That this is an indictment on anybody of an upper class financial standing. And there are those who will read it as such. And I think there is something to be said as anytime Jesus talks about money. The dichotomy in the beginning is between Lazarus and the rich man. The conversation shifts. And of all the characters that Jesus picks to be the spokesperson for paradise, Jesus picks Abraham. He could have picked Moses. Moses was the lawgiver. He could have picked David. David is the premier king of the Jewish line. Why pick Abraham? Well, any Jew at the time of Christ would have known Genesis 13, which describes Abraham's abundant, over-exalted wealth. That Abraham had enough above and beyond that he could sacrifice several percentages at every avenue, that he could just give up whenever he was threatened, whenever he felt compassion. You see in these stories again and again that Abraham donates, gives, blesses, charges, sends out, and doesn't miss a beat. He is known for his wealth. And I like to think it's just because he didn't have kids till later in life. Do you know how expensive they are? My word. Dad, I want to play hockey. Oh, God. Is it the equipment? No, it's the health bills. It's all the doctor visits. It is Abraham who is understood as one of the most generous with his wealth. He opens up his gates because one of the most, if you read your Old Testament, which I encourage you to do, the most common refrain from God to his people, you were slaves. You were strangers in a strange land. You will always have the poor with you. Remember, if they are always with you, remember that you were one of them. And be generous with what you have. The corners of your fields, you do not get to harvest them, because that's for the wanderer. That's one of God's commands. And so Abraham is set up as this dichotomy, not because as what to do if you have more than enough. For Abraham is in paradise. He's not in Tartarus. And it's not because of his lineage. Poverty in our world is a complicated issue. It was on today's newspaper, above the fold. How complicated this is. Homeless camps, no easy fixes. I'm not about to stand up here and say, there's only one way to deal with homelessness or people who beg. But I will say that how you view people who are less fortunate than you, what is clear here is check your heart. You don't have to I give to everybody who asks. That was a policy. And I've had scores of fellow clergy, nonprofit organizations try to convince me otherwise. I have read the books. I've read Toxic Charity, When Helping Hurts. And I run and I try to read the last chapter. Okay, so what do we do about it? I have yet to be given a good idea. If there was one idea about how to change if we could just do this, poverty would end. We would have done it by now. I've been burned too many times to think that every dollar I've ever handed out went to food or shelter. And I do understand that giving a drunk a drink or giving an addict another hit isn't helping. But I do believe that all people deserve safety, no matter where they are or how high they are. People need to be able to be safe. And I believe when I read this story from Jesus, that how I view my brothers and sisters, especially those who are in pain, whether by physical, circumstantial, through levels of mental health, drug addiction, corporate and systemic issues of poverty and oppression, if I view them as part of the problem and not as my brothers and sisters, the only thing more costly than the money I have in my pocket may be not helping at all. For the ways that I judge people based off how they dress or how they're useful to me or their past mistakes, their future, how they are organizing their life, these are personal sins. And I'm trying my best to not just open the gates of my life to them, but to hear their story, to know their name, to look them in the eye. Because the point of this story isn't just this is who's going to heaven and this is who's going to hell. This is about life right now. Charles Dickens telling you the story of the Christmas Carol isn't about just how will you be remembered. It's who is Ebenezer Scrooge? Who is in his immediate circle that he can help, that he can serve? This is bigger than just eternal salvation. And I quote, how often do you get to say that? This is bigger than our eternal salvation. Because it's about people who are alive right here, right now. Oh, my friends. I'll share one last story. One last bit. Jeff Thomas, Pastor Jeff, God rest his soul. He wanted me to be his intern, and I didn't have it in me. I just did not have it in me to be his intern. He was the pastor at Skid Row in LA County, one of the pastors. And he told me this story as a prep. He sets up, when you're dealing with Skid Row, and I had visited it a couple of times, you're dealing with a few people who are really in it thick. Really thick. A lot of hard cases, and you got to say no a lot. And he said so, and I didn't have a problem with any of that. But then he told me this story about this guy, really every Sunday guy. He was homeless, really trying to make it. And they were slowly working on him. He would volunteer to usher and whatnot, but they were slowly trying to get him out of poverty. So they got him to the point where he got a job. And some of the problem with poverty is that, you need an address and a phone number. When you're homeless, how are you going to get a job if you don't have a cell phone or a home? But they figured it out. They got this guy work. And his first day, the thing that they said is you can't wear a t-shirt. You got to wear a shirt with a button, right? Button down the front. That was their one requirement. And so the church, this church that didn't have anybody, I look around here, we've got a spectrum of the economic standing. This church did not. There was one category of financials, and Pastor Jeff was just a master grant writer. And that's where any of the economics came from, the extra economics. So the community gathered together and got this guy Frederick. I always want to remember his name. They got Frederick a shirt, dress shirt. And he wore it for his first week of work, right? Went to the church Saturday night, cleaned the shirt Sunday morning. It's his first Sunday, and he's like, I'm wearing my best clothes for church. Sunday morning. Well, Pastor Jeff was getting ready in a hurry, and he was shaving. Shaved a bit too quick, nicked himself. That Sunday morning, he had blood on his collar. Shows up for church. Frederick was working the door. He sees Pastor Jeff come in, and he's like, what's that on your shirt? He's like, oh, it's blood. I nicked myself. He goes, Pastor can't have a dirty shirt. Starts unbuttoning his shirt. They're the same size. Frederick gives the pastor his one clean shirt off his back so that the pastor would have a clean shirt for Sunday morning. Pastor Jeff tells me, he's like, I had everything in me to be like, no, I'm okay. But this is, if there was ever a widow and the two mites story, okay, I'll wear it. Weeks go by, right? And this is just like one of those quintessential stories. Like Frederick is building up, he's got some money in his account now, and they're working on maybe getting some placement for him. And he's becoming just this lively member of the church. And after like a lot of votes and like talking with the board, they give him a key because like he can open up the church then. They gave him the key that Sunday. The entire sound system was missing. The computers were gone. And Frederick was never seen again. It just never came back. Pastor Jeff told me this story. And he's like, so, what do you do? This is your test to be my intern. What do you do? And I'm like, cry? I believe there's a lot of parts of the Bible that are like lamenting and gnashing of teeth. Come on, what else do you do? He's like, no, we praise. We celebrate. We raise money for the next guy to get a shirt for work. You can't let your heart be hardened. Learn lessons, yes. Learn a lesson. Set up systems. But we are not allowed to view our brothers and sisters, no matter who they are, no matter what they've done. We are called to look at them with the eyes that Jesus does. To do otherwise, we need to be called back again and again. It is a continual life lesson. To look at ourselves with the same mercy and extend that to even the people who may try to do us harm. May it be so.